Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I'd love to know that too. I never planned on going back to small towns, especially not the kind that sit on the edge of an interstate where the only things open after midnight are gas stations, liquor stores, and a Walmart that never actually sleeps. But life doesn't always ask what you want. Sometimes it just drops you where it needs you. I was 28 when everything unraveled at once. A breakup that felt like a slow-motion car crash. A job that ate my sleep but not my bills. And a landlord who loved surprise inspections. When my aunt called from Tennessee asking if I could stay with her for a month and help around her house after her hip surgery, I grabbed the chance like it was oxygen. Her place sat in the outskirts of a town called Redfield, a quiet, nowhere blip along I-65, a place where porch lights burned yellow all night and everyone owned at least 2 dogs. I thought I'd be bored out of my mind, but I needed calm. I needed to reset. I needed to breathe again. The first night felt peaceful. I sat on her porch, listening to cicadas buzz like summer machinery while sipping warm Coke from a plastic bottle. The air felt sticky but clean, familiar in a way I hadn't felt in years. I stocked the pantry but not the freezer, my aunt said, leaning on her cane. If you want actual food, you'll have to hit Walmart. They remodeled last year, all fancy now. I looked at the clock, 11:38 p.m. I'll go tomorrow, she smirked. It's open 24 hours, sweetie, and you've always been a night owl. She wasn't wrong. 15 minutes later, I was in her old Honda Accord, windows rolled down, warm southern air brushing against my face as I drove down the empty road. The Walmart sat alone on a hill, a blue sign glowing like a beacon in the dark, the parking lot half lit and mostly empty, except for a few scattered cars and a long-haul truck idling near the edge. At the time, nothing about it felt strange. I wish I could say that early instinct, that tiny flick of discomfort, warned me. But it didn't. Not then. Not when it mattered. The sliding doors hissed open, letting out the cold, recycled air that instantly fogged my glasses. A greeter, mid-40s, carrying fatigue like a second uniform, gave a small nod. "Late run?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep," I said. He laughed under his breath. "Ain't that the story of everyone here after midnight?" I grabbed a cart and started down the front aisle. At first glance, everything looked normal. Bright lights, shiny floors, big blue rollback signs. But as I passed the produce section, the echo of my footsteps felt louder than usual, like the store's emptiness swallowed sound instead of bouncing it back. I turned the corner and nearly ran into a young employee pulling a pallet of cereal boxes. "Sorry," I said. "You're good," he replied, shifting to the side. "Are you here alone?" I blinked. "Yeah?" He forced a smile. "Stay where the lights are bright, all right? We're short-staffed tonight." It was such an odd comment that I actually paused. What does that mean? But he was already pushing the pallet away, the squeaky wheels fading down the aisle. I shook it off. People in small towns said weird things. Lack of sleep probably made them stranger. My cart rattled as I headed toward the freezer section at the back. That's when I noticed the first man. Tall, heavy boots, wearing a denim jacket even though it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He stood near the end of the aisle staring straight at a row of frozen dinners. Not picking one up, not comparing labels, just staring. "Okay," I whispered to myself, sliding past him. He didn't look at me, didn't blink, nothing. I moved on. In the next aisle, another man, younger, shaved head, hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring at a shelf like he was waiting for it to move. Something crawled up my spine. People don't stand that still. Not unless they're sleeping, or thinking, or pretending not to watch. I sped up, turned another corner, and almost slammed into a woman pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies. Her eyes were wide, frightened, like she'd seen something she couldn't explain. "Are you okay?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No. Nope. Not staying here another minute." She pushed past me, muttering something under her breath. "They ain't right tonight. They ain't right tonight." I watched her disappear down the main aisle, and that's when lights flickered. just once, but enough to make the whole store shudder with darkness for a fraction of a second. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone. Something was off. Every part of the store felt wrong. Heavy, pressurized, like the air before a storm. Then, a voice behind me. "Hey, are you good?" I spun. A guy about my age stood behind a row of stacked plastic bins. Baseball cap, faint stubble, tired eyes. He wore a navy Walmart vest with the name tag Jace pinned crooked on the front. "Sorry if I scared you," he said, hands up. "You didn't scare me." Total lie. Jace nodded toward the freezers. "You picking something up? I can help you find it." "I'm okay," I said, "just grabbing a few things." He hesitated. Then he stepped closer. "Listen, if you start hearing anything weird, like, noise that doesn't sound like it's coming from customers or employees," he swallowed, "just leave. Don't try to check it out." I stared at him. "What kind of noise?" I said, "Don't check, just go." My heart thumped unevenly. "What's going on?" He shook his head. "Not supposed to talk about it. But trust me, you don't want to be in here when it starts." "When what starts?" Before he could answer, something slammed. Not nearby, not a cart, not a door. It sounded like something massive fell against metal shelving somewhere deep in the store. Jace's eyes widened. "Shit," he whispered. "It's early tonight." Before I could speak, he grabbed my arm. "We need to get to the front." I stumbled after him, my cart rattling behind me. "What's happening?" "We had a thing last month," he said quickly, voice low. "A man running through the back aisles yelling. We thought he was high, except he disappeared between cameras. Poof, gone. Even the cops didn't know what to write in the report. That doesn't make sense. Nothing in this place makes sense after midnight." Another slam, farther away, but louder, like something heavy was moving, something dragging. I grabbed Jace's vest. "Tell me the truth." He stopped. I looked around, leaned in close. "People vanish in this store." He said it so quietly I barely heard it. Before I could react, screaming. A man screaming. A full guttural sound that echoed through the aisles like he was being flayed alive. My blood turned cold. "What the hell was that?" Jace didn't answer. He just pulled me faster. We turned the corner into a wide aisle and froze. The denim jacket man I'd seen earlier was running full speed toward us, eyes wide, hands covered in blood. "They're behind the shelves," he screamed. "They're behind the..." The lights flickered, and something yanked him sideways. Not someone, something. Something I couldn't see. He vanished between two aisles like he'd been pulled through a curtain. I screamed. Jace pulled me backward. "Go, go, go!" We ran, full sprint. The shelves rattled like something massive pushed against them from behind. I didn't look, couldn't look. Every instinct screamed not to look. As we neared the front, the greeter was gone. The cashiers were gone. Carts lay on their sides like people dropped them mid-run. I grabbed Jace's arm. "Where is everyone?" He shook his head. "They ran. They always run." "What about the doors? Why aren't we out yet?" The automatic doors stood ahead, but they weren't opening. They were stuck. Dead. Jace cursed. "Power surge. They always lock when..." He froze. We both heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Wet. Coming from behind us. Coming closer. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. "Jace," my voice cracked. "Open the doors." He kicked the emergency latch. Nothing. He slammed it again. "Come on. Come on." The footsteps grew louder, closer. Something exhaled behind us. A breath that sounded wrong. Too deep. Too loud. Too close. "Jace," I screamed. "Open it." He pulled the fire alarm. Nothing. He slammed the window pane with a metal cart. Nothing. The steps stopped. Right behind me. Something hovered over my shoulder. I felt the air move. Cold. Damp. Like breathing from something that shouldn't be breathing. I sobbed. "I don't want to die here. Please." Jace let out a raw yell and slammed the emergency bar with all his weight, and the doors exploded open. We fell through the doorway, hitting the concrete hard. Cold air hit us like a slap. Behind us, something moved in the shadows. Something thick, tall, not shaped right, not human-shaped. Then, the lights above the entrance burst. The entire front went black. Jace grabbed my hand. "Run!" We sprinted across the parking lot toward the car lanes, breath burning, legs shaking. I didn't look back. Couldn't. Every cell in my body screamed danger. We didn't stop until we reached the far end of the lot. I collapsed against a shopping cart corral, gasping. "What was that?" I choked out. Jay shook his head, trembling. "I don't know. No one knows. But it's been happening for months, and management keeps covering it up." I stared back at the Walmart building. Bright, normal, silent. If you didn't know better, you'd think nothing happened at all. But I knew. And the worst part, as we stood there, the lights inside flickered again. Just for a moment. And I swear, I saw something tall move between aisle 14 and 15. Something that stopped when it saw us. Something that waited. The police came. Sirens. Flashlights. Questions. But when they searched the store, nothing. No blood. No denim jacket. No drag marks. No broken lights. No security footage. Everything we saw, gone. One officer pulled me aside. "You sure you weren't just tired? Late-night stores can play tricks on people." I wanted to scream, but Jay squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "They won't believe you. They never do." By sunrise, the parking lot was empty again. Walmart reopened like nothing had happened. Customers walked in, kids ran around. Life pretended to be normal, but I knew the truth. Something lives inside that building. Something that hunts after midnight. Something that watches the aisles the moment the world falls quiet. And somewhere, under those fluorescent lights, it's still waiting. Waiting for someone else to walk in alone. Waiting for the next breath. Waiting for the next mistake. Waiting for you. I always thought I'd gotten over it. The way fluorescent lights used to make me sweat. The way a sudden loudspeaker crackle could send my nerves skittering like startled mice. But trauma doesn't clock out just because your shift ends. I'm 31 now, older than I feel. And for the past few years, I'd managed to avoid retail completely, bouncing between temp warehouse gigs, customer support from home, even overnight cleaning in office buildings. Anything but a store, anything but aisles, anything but the kind of place where I'd once seen a man bleed out between automotive and clearance because two guys got into an argument over a stolen backpack. I told myself I was done with environments where danger could slip between the aisles unnoticed. But rent in Ridgeford, Ohio doesn't care what you survived. And when my last job disappeared after budget cuts, I found myself staring at a job posting for Northway Market, a Walmart-style superstore right outside the interstate exit. I didn't want to apply. I stared at the listing for 3 days before finally submitting the application at 2 a.m., sitting in the dark with the glow of my phone burning my eyes. "I just need 3 months," I whispered to myself. "Just until I save enough to breathe again." 3 months felt doable. 3 months felt safe. That was before I saw him. Before the smell. Before the shuffle I still hear some nights, even when no one is near me. My first week at Northway Market was strangely normal. Corporate training videos, half-broken handheld scanners, and coworkers who all looked exhausted in a way retail workers tend to be. Eyes a little too dull, movements a little too practiced. My supervisor was a skinny, fast-talking guy named Lyle, with a habit of saying "my dude" every 3 sentences. My dude, if someone asks you what aisle the vitamins are in, you gotta walk them there even if it's across the store. Customer service is king, all right? He'd laugh like he knew the rule was bullshit but was forced to repeat it anyway. I worked mostly in the home goods and pharmacy overflow sections, zoning shelves, tossing out expired sale tags, answering questions from folks who didn't even glance at me when they spoke. "Hey, where are their back braces at? You got heating pads in stock? Y'all still price match Target?" I kept my head down, kept my earbuds tucked under my hoodie so only one was visible, listening to quiet music when no managers were nearby. I could handle the grind. I could handle the monotony. What I couldn't handle started the second Tuesday of my 4th week. It began with a smell, subtle at first, like a faint metallic rot drifting under my nose as I restocked humidifiers. I thought maybe something had leaked, maybe trash had been left in the back too long. But with every passing minute, the smell intensified. Sharper, warmer, almost chemical, like roadkill soaked with gasoline. "Damn," I muttered, pressing the back of my hand to my nose. Something crawled in the vents and died. I glanced around for a spill, anything, but the aisle was spotless. Just as I started toward the end cap, I heard footsteps, slow, irregular, like someone dragging a foot behind them. Sheaf. Clunk. Sheaf. Clunk. I turned and saw a man stepping out from behind the tall shelving unit. Tall, maybe 6'4", thin, shoulders hunched. His clothes looked wrong. Layers of mismatched fabric, like thrift store rejects slapped together without care. A torn work jacket, blackened jeans, a long frayed scarf even though it wasn't cold. One boot on the right foot, the left wrapped in filthy strips of cloth tied so tight they seemed fused to whatever was underneath. His skin was pale but tinted gray, the way concrete looks under rain. His eyes were sunken, ringed with deep shadows, unfocused but intent. When he walked past me, he didn't even glance up. The smell hit full force. The same dense rot but now mixed with ammonia, like old cleaning chemicals left to curdle. I coughed and stepped back. "Sir, you okay?" I asked, voice cracking. He didn't answer, didn't slow down, just kept moving, each step dragging that wrapped foot in a disturbing rhythm. I remember thinking he was probably homeless, maybe injured, maybe mentally ill, sad, but not supernatural or dangerous. Just broken, just lost. But then he turned toward the pharmacy counter and everything shifted. Behind the counter was Brielle, a tough 28-year-old who didn't take crap from anyone. She had a raspy voice, a quick laugh, and a habit of calling everyone hon. She was helping an older man with picking out cold medicine when the tall stranger leaned heavily against the counter. Brielle glanced up, eyebrows pinched. "Hey there, hon, you need something?" she asked. The man didn't speak. Instead, he slowly reached down and lifted the ragged cloth around his left leg. And I swear, I still feel my stomach drop when I remember what I saw. His leg, no, the absence of his leg, was exposed. The flesh from mid-shin downward looked eaten away, not cut or wounded, but consumed, like something had hollowed him from the inside. A glistening hole gaped wide, oozing thick yellow-green fluid that clung to his skin in stringy webs. The edges of the wound were blackened, cracking, with patches of what looked like mold blooming outward. Brielle covered her mouth. "Oh, Jesus Christ, hon, what happened to you?" she gasped. The customer beside her stepped back so fast he hit an end cap. "Dude needs a hospital," someone behind me yelled. The man shook his head. "No hospital," he rasped, voice like gravel soaked in water. Don't let them take me." His eyes flicked around like he expected someone to leap out of the ceiling. My instincts kicked in. "Sir, I can call an ambulance," I said, trying to sound calm. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a second something sparked behind his eyes. Fear. Exhausted, desperate fear. "Please don't," he whispered, voice thin. "Not them." "Who?" I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. But before he answered, he clenched the cloth back over his leg, turned and began hobbling away. "Wait," Brielle called. "Sir, you can't just hang on." But he moved faster than he had arrived, dragging himself down the aisle, past startled customers, leaving the stink of rot in his wake. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe because every instinct in me screamed that a human being shouldn't be able to walk on a leg that decayed. Maybe because I recognized the look in his eyes. The same look I once had when medics dragged me into the back of an ambulance after the Walmart shooting years ago. The look of someone who didn't think help would help. "Sir, just stop for a second," I called, walking briskly. He didn't answer. He reached the sliding doors, stepped outside into the hazy daylight, and I swear, right as he crossed into the parking lot, the smell vanished. Completely. Like someone had shut off a switch. The police arrived within minutes. So did the EMTs. They reviewed camera footage, took statements, walked the lot, checked the bus stop, searched behind the dumpsters. Nothing. He was just gone. Like he walked into the air and dissolved. "Probably hopped into a car," the officer said, though even he sounded unconvinced. Brielle kept muttering. Something was wrong with that man. Something was real wrong. The EMT shook his head. If the wound was that advanced, he wouldn't make it far. Necrotic tissue like that. He didn't finish the sentence. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hole in his leg. I smelled that rot. I heard him whisper, "Don't let them take me." By morning, I'd convinced myself I'd never see him again. I was wrong. 3 days later, during a slow Thursday evening shift, I was stocking laundry detergent when I felt something shift in the air. A pressure like the store was holding its breath. Then the smell. Soft at first, barely noticeable, like distant mold. No, I muttered, dropping a bottle. I turned toward the aisle entrance. Nothing. I stepped slowly forward. The air thickened. The rot grew stronger. I heard the faintest shuffle, uneven, from the back storage hallway. "Lyle," I called out, hoping to God I'd hear his goofy voice answer. Silence. I edged down the hallway, heart pounding so loud I heard my pulse in my ears. The hallway was dimmer than usual, flickering. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Sir, if that's you, I swear we're just trying to help." A shadow moved at the far end, tall, thin. My breath froze. The figure stepped forward. It was him, or what was left of him, because now his face, once merely gaunt, looked hollowed, the cheekbones sharp as knives beneath his skin. His right hand was wrapped in new filthy bandages, and through gaps I saw dark stains spreading outward. His breath came in rattled gasps. "They're coming," he croaked. "You have to listen." You have to listen." My voice trembled. "Who's coming?" He reached out a shaking hand. "Not people. Not anymore. Not since they touched me. Underground. Under the tunnels." I stammered. "Dude, what tunnels?" He opened his mouth to answer, but then his eyes widened in terror as if he saw something behind me. "Too late," he rasped. He staggered backward, then turned, limping faster than before, retreating into the back exit door that led outside. When I spun around, expecting something to be there, something he feared so much, there was nothing. Just dim lights and crates. No sound but my breathing. But from that night on, things got worse. Lights flickered more often. Customers complained about strange drafts. Brielle swore she saw someone tall standing by the pharmacy at closing, only for the cameras to show an empty aisle. And every so often, that smell drifted through the store. Brief, faint, like a reminder. The worst night was the one where everything came together. It was close to midnight, closing shift. Only 5 employees left inside. I was zoning near the automotive section when the overhead lights buzzed loudly, dimmed, then surged. At the same time, an emergency alarm beeped twice in the distance. "The hell?" I muttered. I pulled out my walkie. "Lyle, you getting alarms back there?" Static. "Brielle, you hear that?" More static. Then, faint beneath the static, came breathing, wet, ragged breathing. I froze. "Lyle, quit messing around, man." No response. Then the smell hit, stronger than ever, so strong it coated my tongue. I gagged. The lights at the far end of the aisle flickered violently, and then I heard it, the shuffle. Shuff. Clunk. Shuff. Clunk. My throat tightened. "No," I whispered. The tall man stepped into view, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, emerging slowly from the dim, were 3 shapes. Not fully formed, wrong in the way nightmares are wrong. Tall, hunched figures with movements that didn't register as human. Arms too long, heads angled as if their necks were half melted. Their bodies shifted like shadows caught in bad lighting. No faces, just sunken impressions where eyes should be. One of them reached a long gray hand toward the man's shoulder. He flinched in pain. "They followed me," he choked out. "They don't let go once they find you." I stumbled backward, heart slamming. "What the hell are they?" I cried. He shook his head, tears streaking the grime on his cheeks. "Not from here, not from above. They come from under. Places people forgot. Places closed off. I fell in. I shouldn't have gone down there." The shapes moved closer. The man collapsed to one knee, clutching his decayed leg as if it burned. "Run," he gasped. "Please, they don't want you. Not yet." I didn't think so. I bolted, sprinting past aisles, past displays, toward the front of the store. "Lyle!" I screamed. "Brielle!" my voice echoed. No answer. As I reached the registers, the lights shut off entirely. Darkness swallowed everything. Then I heard whispering, not words, just sounds. Close, too close. I dropped to the ground and crawled blindly, heart slamming. I don't know how long I crawled, seconds, minutes, until my hand hit the push bar of the emergency exit. I shoved it, stumbled outside, and collapsed onto the cool pavement. When the police arrived minutes later, the store lights were normal. The inside was empty. No creatures, no man, no co-workers. But the smell lingered near the pharmacy, and on the floor, beneath a shelving unit, they found filthy bandages soaked in dark fluid. The official report said electrical malfunction, workers leaving early, a vagrant sneaking inside. Nothing supernatural, but I know what I saw. I quit that night. I packed my apartment in 2 days, moved states, took an overnight security job far from large buildings, far from tunnels, far from anything that could echo that shuffle. But some nights, when the world gets too quiet, I smell that faint ammonia rot drifting past me. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear it. The soft, dragging footsteps of someone who was never supposed to walk again. I always told myself I'd never look back at that part of my life, but trauma has a way of sticking to you, like the smell of stale fryer oil in a break room you've spent too many nights in. And every time I think I've moved on, something small, like the hum of fluorescent lights or the beep of a handheld scanner, drags me right back. Because I wasn't just working at some random store. I was 21 and trying to hold my life together at Hill Ridge Supermart, a Walmart-style giant in a small Missouri town where the biggest attractions were a flea market, a gas station with a dying neon sign, and a Walmart competitor that swallowed kids like me whole with promises of steady pay and flexible hours. I grew up in a place where people didn't get to choose their futures. They just hoped the future didn't hurt too much. And after my dad got hurt on a construction site and my mom picked up night shifts at a nursing home, it was on me to keep the lights on, so I took the job, even though I swore I never would, because bills don't negotiate. I still remember my first day. The store manager, Tanner, a big guy with a beard that always smelled faintly like energy drinks, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Welcome to the circus, kid." And he laughed, but not in a funny way. More like he knew something I didn't. My closest coworker was Jace, a quiet dude from St. Louis who had this dry humor that made the long shifts bearable. He'd nudge me with his elbow and whisper stuff like, "Man, if one more customer asks me where we keep the damn tortillas, I'm gonna walk straight into the freezer and freeze myself like a TV dinner." And I'd laugh because at least someone understood how exhausting retail could be. We spent most of our shifts doing freight in the back half of the building, aisles 12 through 22, which the older employees joked about being the dead zone. Not because anything spooky happened there, but because nobody ever wanted to work it. It was quiet, too quiet, like that part of the store existed in a different dimension where time slowed down and the hum of lights sounded just a little too loud. And I always brushed it off as paranoia until everything changed the night the storm hit. It was late July, hot enough that the asphalt outside felt like it was melting, and the air conditioning inside struggled so badly the store felt like a humid swamp. And I was stocking dish soap while Jace scanned labels when the power flickered overhead. Just a hiccup at first, common during storms, but then it flickered again, then again, and all at once the lights cut out entirely for half a second before buzzing back on. And in that tiny blink of darkness, I swear I heard something. A dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. But when the lights returned, everything looked normal. I told myself it was just freight shifting in the back, but then I noticed Jace was staring straight down the aisle, frozen, his handheld scanner hanging from his fingers. "Yo," I whispered, nudging him. "You good?" He didn't blink. He just murmured, "Did you see someone at the end of the aisle?" And I said no, nobody was there, but he shook his head saying, "No, dude, I swear somebody was standing right there, like a tall dude, dirty clothes, like he'd been outside in the mud or something." And I told him he was freaking himself out. But then the smell hit, faint at first, like wet soil mixed with something metallic, and I couldn't pinpoint it until it got stronger, like the reek of rotting meat left in the sun, and I gagged, pulling my shirt collar over my nose. "What the hell is that?" I said, coughing, and Jace muttered, "I don't know, man. I don't know, but it smells like something died back here." We radioed Tanner, but he didn't answer, and customers were starting to notice the smell too, wrinkling their noses, muttering complaints, asking if something spilled in the back room. Tanner finally showed up 10 minutes later, sweating, annoyed, telling us it's probably a backed up drain or some old stock that went bad. And he told us to keep working, but he looked pale, like he knew something was off. 2 hours later, a woman screamed in aisle 18. Everyone around rushed over, employees, customers, and I elbowed my way through, heart pounding, and saw her standing by the end cap of paper towels, pointing with shaking hands at something on the floor, a trail of dark, thick smears leading toward the back hallway, like something injured had dragged itself across the tiles. The woman kept saying, "That's blood! That's blood! Oh my God!" And Tanner tried to calm her, saying, Ma'am, we'll take care of it. Just step back, okay?" But the smell, the same rotting stench, burst stronger now, making people cover their mouths. I knelt down and looked closer. The trail wasn't just blood, it had chunks in it. Tissue, something wet and fibrous. My stomach lurched. "What the?" I whispered, but before I could finish, someone behind me said, "Hey, there's someone back there." And another voice, shaky, added, "He's limping. Dude's limping badly." Tanner snapped at me. "Kid, grab a mop and block off this aisle." But before I moved, I saw him. A tall figure stepped out from the back hallway. He was thin, too thin, His clothes torn and caked with mud, his hair matted, his face gaunt like he hadn't eaten in weeks. But what caught me, what froze me, was his leg. His right pant leg was shredded, exposing skin that didn't look like skin anymore. It was grayish, swollen, with a gash so deep I saw bone glinting under the fluorescent lights, and the flesh around it was blackened, oozing thick greenish pus that dripped onto the floor with soft, horrible splats. People gasped. Someone said, "Jesus Christ," and another whispered, "Call 911. Tanner stepped forward cautiously, hands raised, saying, Sir, you need medical help. We can call an ambulance, all right?" But the man shook his head violently, muttering, No hospitals. They'll find me." His voice cracked like someone had squeezed shards of glass into his throat. My heart hammered. "Who'll find you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The man's eyes snapped toward me, wild, terrified. "The ones beneath," he whispered. "They saw me. They followed me." Tanner told me to step back, but I couldn't. Something about the man felt wrong, like he wasn't just injured, like he was running from something that wasn't human. The automatic doors slid open suddenly with a loud whoosh as customers fled outside, panicking, calling for help. The injured man spun toward the doors, eyes wide, and he hobbled forward, fast, impossibly fast for someone with a destroyed leg. And before anyone could stop him, he burst out into the humid night. Tanner told me and Jace to block the doors, keep customers calm, wait for the police. EMTs arrived 15 minutes later. They canvassed the lot. They checked the gas station nearby. They combed the little drainage ditch beside the building. Nothing, not a single trace of him. "He couldn't have gotten far," one EMT said. "Not in that condition." But he had. Somehow. That night the store closed early, something that almost never happened, and management wrote it off as a biohazard contamination event. They brought in cleanup crews wearing hazmat suits, their faces hidden behind plastic visors as they scrubbed aisle 18. I remember one of them whispering to another, "This doesn't smell like any infection I've ever dealt with, dude." And the other guy muttering, "I don't get paid enough for nightmare crap like this." When I went home, I showered twice, scrubbing my skin until it burned, but I couldn't get the smell out of my nose. I barely slept. The next night, the lights flickered again. Then the smell returned, then the dragging sound. Employees started calling out, saying they felt unsafe. One cashier swore she saw a tall shadow standing behind the toy aisle at closing, even though she was the only one in that section. A stocker in receiving said he heard someone whisper his name from the gap between pallets, but nobody else was there. Even Tanner looked shaken. He pulled me aside one night and muttered, "Kid, keep your head on a swivel, all right? Something ain't right in this store." Hearing him say that terrified me more than anything else. The breaking point came 3 nights later. I was zoning the laundry aisle when the power went out completely, pitch blackness swallowing the store. From somewhere in the dark, a voice rasped, "Help! Help me!" I froze. "Jace?" I whispered. No answer. "Who's there?" The voice came again, closer. "Please, don't let them take me again." The air grew cold. The smell slammed into me harder than ever. My eyes watered. I stumbled backward, heart thundering. Then I heard shuffling, fast, uneven, chaotic. The emergency lights flicked on in faint red glows, and for a split second I saw him again, the injured man. But now he looked worse, like his body was decaying faster, chunks of flesh missing, his eyes sunken to almost nothing. Behind him, silhouetted in the dim red glow, were shapes, tall, twisted, moving in ways that made my brain reject what I saw. Their limbs bent wrong, their heads tilted at impossible angles. Their skin looked like damp stone. They whispered in low, warping sounds that didn't match any human language. One of them reached for him with impossibly long fingers. He cried out, "Don't let them!" And then the lights cut out again. I ran. I don't remember thinking. I don't remember breathing. I just ran through aisles, bumping into displays, knocking over baskets. I smacked into the emergency exit bar and crashed outside into the humid Missouri night, collapsing onto the pavement as distant thunder rolled overhead. I never thought my life would circle back to fluorescent lights, rolling carts, and the dull hum of industrial air conditioners. But here I was, standing in the middle of Ridgeview Market Center, in the outskirts of Fairborn, Ohio, trying to steady my breathing while adjusting the stiff navy vest that still smelled like plastic and someone else's detergent, and the whole time thinking, how the hell did it come to this? because 10 years ago, I had a steady job in an HVAC supply office, a little place called Northline Industrial, where my days were a blur of purchase orders, inventory spreadsheets, safety briefings, and half-hearted jokes in the break room about how someone needed to fix the coffee machine for real this time. And I liked that life because it was predictable, quiet, harmless, and it made me feel like maybe adulthood wasn't going to chew me up the way it had chewed up my father, who'd bounced between warehouse jobs until his back gave out and he had nothing left but pain pills and bitterness. But then came the downsizing, the budget cuts, the restructuring, the strategic realignment, all the little corporate buzzwords that sound like white noise until they land on your own shoulders. And suddenly, I was the guy carrying a box with framed photos and cheap desk snacks out through double doors that hissed as if mocking me. And my supervisor, a tall guy named Rick with tired blue eyes, kept saying, "Man, I'm real sorry about this, really?" And I kept nodding even though my throat felt tight, because sorry didn't pay rent, and sorry didn't refill the gas tank of my rusted-out Ford Escape, and sorry didn't stop the late notices that arrived with a kind of polite cruelty I didn't know paper could carry. So after 2 months of job boards and rejection emails that repeated the same corporate script, we've decided to move forward with candidates whose qualifications better match our needs. I finally broke down and applied to retail again, something I'd promised myself I'd never do after what happened years back at a different store. But sometimes promises don't mean much when your pantry is empty and the landlord tapes a yellow slip to your doorstep that reads, "Final Notice." And Ridgeview Market Center wasn't even a real Walmart, just the kind of giant discount store built to feel like one, with wide aisles, echoing ceilings, cheap end cap displays, and signs that looked a little too familiar, as if the owners wanted customers to say, "Close enough." And from the moment I walked in for my first shift, every nerve in my body felt coiled, remembering the night in my past I tried so hard to bury, the one with the gunshots and the panicked stampede and the metallic smell of blood mixing with spilled fabric softener, a memory I'd never fully processed but had learned to shove behind mental doors I prayed stayed shut. But you can't run from your own brain forever, and the first night back under fluorescent lights made it clear the past wasn't done with me. Not even close, because I couldn't stop scanning every aisle corner, every customer's hands, every sudden noise, just waiting for something to go wrong. And the other employees noticed, especially this guy named Jasper, a lanky kid with messy blonde hair who talked like every sentence was a half-whispered confession. And he laughed a little too hard when I flinched at a dropped jar of pickles and said, "Dude, relax, it ain't that serious." And I forced a smile, but my chest was tight because it was serious to me. And I didn't feel like explaining that I wasn't scared of jars. I was scared of people, scared of what people turn into when panic hits, scared of the chaos that blooms in the space between uncertainty and survival. And yet I kept showing up for every shift because I needed the money, and because pretending everything was normal was easier than facing how cracked I felt inside. And for a couple weeks things were fine, or at least fine in a retail sense. Crying toddlers, impatient customers, cluttered aisles, endless restocking, and I floated through it with a numb kind of detachment. Until one evening in late October, when the store was quiet in the way only big stores can be, with distant murmurs bouncing off shiny floors and carts rattling like echoes from another world, and I was zoning aisle 22, the health supplies aisle, ace bandages, ankle braces, back supports, Epsom salt, heating pads, stuff like that, listening to a podcast in one ear while my other ear stayed open, because you never let both ears close in a place like this, not if you've lived what I lived. And that was when I smelled it. A thick, sour, almost chemical stench that made my throat clamp and my stomach flip. And I muttered, "What the hell?" under my breath, pulling up my sleeve to cover my nose. But the smell only grew stronger, like rotting meat mixed with ammonia and something metallic underneath. And then I heard the footsteps. Slow, uneven, dragging, like someone was sliding one foot rather than lifting it, and my skin prickled before I even looked up, because my body recognized danger before my brain did. And when I finally turned toward the aisle entrance, I saw a man whose appearance hit me like a punch. Tall but hunched, his shoulders caving inward like he was folding into himself, wearing a ragged olive jacket stained with something dark near the cuffs, cargo pants that looked wet near the bottom, and shoes that didn't match. One was a cracked brown boot, the other was a dirty sock wrapped in duct tape and strips of cloth, and his face was sharp and hollow, cheeks sucked in like he hadn't eaten in days. eyes bloodshot and unfocused, as if he wasn't fully seeing the world around him. And I froze because something felt deeply wrong, deeper than homelessness or illness or injury. Something that made instinct scream at me to back away, to hide, to call for help. But my voice got stuck somewhere between fear and confusion, and he shuffled past me without looking up, his breath rattling like gravel in a metal pipe. And he whispered something that sounded like, "Not yet, please." But I wasn't sure if the words were meant for me or for himself, and he moved toward the pharmacy desk up front, where a woman named Rosalind, short, sharp-tongued, mid-40s, always chewing gum, was ringing up a customer. And I couldn't stop watching because something about the man's gait and the horrible smell shadowing him felt like a warning no one else noticed. And then he stopped at the counter and slowly lifted his pant leg. And what I saw made my pulse crack open with panic. His calf was split open, a gaping wound the size of a fist, the edges swollen and greenish, skin peeling back in sticky strips, and beneath it the flesh was gray, almost waxy, and flies, actual flies, were crawling inside the wound, disappearing into pockets of dead tissue before crawling out again. And Rosalind gasped, stumbling backward, shouting, "Sir, sir, you need a hospital. Like now. You can't walk around like that." While the customer beside her muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath, and stepped away, covering his mouth. And I felt my knees weaken as the smell reached full strength, a putrid wave that made Rosalind gag. And the man just shook his head like a child refusing vegetables, whispering, "No, no doctors, they can't stop it." And his voice cracked like he was holding back tears or pain or some combination of both. And something inside me finally snapped into gear, and I called out, "Do you want us to call an ambulance, sir? Please, just tell us." And he stared ahead, not at me, but through me, with eyes that looked like they'd forgotten what hope felt like. And he whispered, "They won't help. It's already spreading." And before I could even make sense of those words, he lowered his pant leg, turned, and began hobbling back toward the exit, leaving behind a faint trail of something I didn't want to look too closely at. And Rosalind shouted, "Jasper, call 911, now!" While I followed the man at a distance, not sure if I wanted to stop him or just watch him leave. But he moved surprisingly fast despite the dragging foot, weaving past displays until he slipped out through the sliding doors into the cold night air. And by the time paramedics arrived, he was gone, vanished into the parking lot shadows like he'd never been there. And the EMTs searched around the building, behind dumpsters, along the service road, even checked with nearby shelters. But there was nothing, no sign of him, no record of anyone matching his description at any hospital. And for days afterward, the smell lingered in aisle 22, faint but unmistakable. And every night I clocked out with a tightness in my chest that made me scan the parking lot like he'd suddenly appear again, dragging that ruined leg toward me, whispering, "It's spreading," in that broken voice. And the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the guilt, that I hadn't done more, that I'd let him walk away into the dark with death wrapped around his leg like a curse. And the store tried to move on. Corporate sent a generic email about evaluating safety protocols. Management told us to stay alert, and customers kept shopping like nothing had happened. Because that's how the world is. People vanish all the time, and the world just keeps rolling its carts and scanning its barcodes. But I couldn't shake the memory of that man, or the smell, or the look in his eyes when he said doctors couldn't help. And some nights, when I'm walking past the health aisle after close, I swear I hear that dragging step again, just faintly, like a warning carried on recirculated air. And I turn, heart hammering, but there's no one there, only the echo of fluorescent buzzing and my own breath fogging in the cold artificial light. And every time I tell myself it's nothing, just nerves, just trauma replaying old loops. But deep down, I know what I felt was real, what I smelled was real, what I saw was real. And some people don't vanish because they want to. They vanish because something out there waits for folks who slip between the cracks. Folks no one notices. Folks who rot from the inside with no one to save them. And I don't know if that man is still out there somewhere, limping through back alleys, falling apart piece by piece, or if whatever was spreading finally overtook him. But I can't forget him, not ever. And every shift I show up, punch in, straighten my vest, and tell myself I'm doing this because life didn't leave me a choice. But some nights I wonder if the real reason I stay is because I'm afraid that if I leave, if I let my guard down, that dragging footstep will finally catch up to me, and I'll understand too late what he meant when he said no one could stop it. I never expected my life to circle back to the graveyard shift aisles of a big box store, but I guess that's what happens when life backs you into corners you never asked for, and bills stack up like accusations, and every rejection email hits you like a reminder of how fast stability can vanish, because I had a decent life once, steady job at a mid-sized electrical supply company in Dayton, Ohio, a place called Hartwell Systems, where my days were predictable and safe, just invoices and inventory logs, stale coffee in the break room, and coworkers who complained about everything but still clocked in on time. But then Hartwell got swallowed by some out-of-state corporation, and suddenly we were hearing phrases like department consolidation, streamlined workforce, and operational downsizing, which everyone knows are just polite ways of saying you're screwed. And sure enough, one late Tuesday afternoon, while the sky outside turned the kind of gray that makes the whole world look tired, my supervisor, this soft-spoken guy named Harold, who always smelled faintly of citrus hand sanitizer, called me into the office and said, "Look, man, I hate this, but they're cutting your position." And I just sat there with this numb ringing in my ears, nodding like I understood, even though my thoughts were sprinting in every direction, because I'd just signed a new lease, my car insurance had increased, and I didn't have family with deep pockets to fall back on. So over the next couple months, I worked through my meager savings, $8 menu dinners, applied to anything that paid above minimum wage, logistics, call centers, light industrial, clerical, but every time I thought I had a shot, I got another, "We regret to inform you" email. And one night, sitting at my kitchen table, while rain tapped the window like someone asking to be let in, I realized I had no choice but to return to the one type of job I swore I'd never touch again. The retail night shift. The exact world where some of the worst memories of my life were born. The world of fluorescent lights and frantic customers, and the lingering echo of the night years ago when gunfire shattered the calm inside a Walmart where I used to work. A memory I had shoved so deep inside myself that sometimes I thought I'd imagined it, except I hadn't. And the fear still lived in the back of my skull, waiting for moments of weakness. But rent doesn't care about trauma, and hunger doesn't accept excuses. So I applied to Ridgefield Superstore, Walmart's cheaper, grittier cousin, out on the outskirts of Ravenbrook, Ohio, a place where the parking lot lights buzzed like 6 cicadas and the asphalt cracked like old scars. And before I knew it, I found myself pulling on the navy vest, pinning a name tag that read Owen, and stepping into the store's vast fluorescent belly, trying to pretend I didn't feel the same dread I felt on the night of the shooting years earlier. And the first couple of weeks weren't terrible. Just endless aisles to zone, pallets to break down, sleepy customers asking where the energy drinks were, co-workers trying to chat through the fatigue. And I mostly kept my head down, focusing on stacking boxes and scanning barcodes. But the quiet of the night shift has a way of messing with your sense of reality, because everything feels too still, too open, too easy for something to slip up behind you without warning. And one night around 2:15 a.m., while I was stocking shelves in aisle 14, the first aid and over-the-counter meds aisle, I smelled something that made my whole body lock up. Because it wasn't just unpleasant, it was wrong. Like rotten meat soaked in ammonia and something metallic underneath. And it hit me so fast I gagged and stumbled back, muttering, "Jesus, what the hell is that?" under my breath, pulling my shirt up over my nose, scanning the floor for spoiled product or a dead mouse or something logical. But the aisle was clean, and the smell was getting stronger, thicker, like it had weight to it. And then I heard it, a slow, dragging footstep that echoed faintly down the linoleum, a sound that made the hairs on my arms rise, and I turned just in time to see a figure limping toward me from the far end of the aisle. And for a second, all I could do was stare, because the man looked like he'd been carved out of exhaustion and suffering. Tall but slouched, wearing a filthy denim jacket with one sleeve torn, dark cargo pants damp near the hem, and his shoes didn't match. One was a battered work boot, and the other was just strips of cloth wrapped around a swollen foot, held together with duct tape, and his face was a haunting kind of thin, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed both hollow and aware at the same time. And he didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, just shuffled past with that awful dragging step that scraped against the floor like sandpaper against bone, and I whispered, "Sir, you okay?" Even though every instinct in me screamed to step away, and he didn't answer, just kept moving toward the pharmacy desk where a co-worker named Leah, short, curly hair, wore beanies even indoors, was scanning inventory, and she froze when she saw him, her hand tightening around the scanner, and she whispered, "Owen, what the hell?" But the man didn't speak until he reached the counter, where he slowly, painfully bent down and started lifting the left leg of his pants, and what I saw next has been burned into my mind so vividly it still makes my stomach turn when I think about it, because his calf was split open by a wound so grotesque it didn't seem real at first. A wide gash with swollen edges, the skin discolored in shades of gray, yellow, and a sickly green, the tissue inside looking soft and wet, and flies buzzing around it as if they'd lived there for days, and Leah staggered back, choking out, Sir, oh my God, you need a hospital right now," her voice cracking as she grabbed for the phone, and I felt this cold pressure building behind my ribs because the smell was overwhelming now, thick enough to make my eyes water, and the man finally looked up at us, and the expression in his eyes wasn't anger or fear. It was something like resignation, like he'd been carrying a burden so long, he'd stopped expecting anyone to help, and he whispered, voice raspy and desperate, Can't go back there. They can't fix it." And I stepped forward, holding my phone out, my hands shaking so badly my fingers nearly slipped. And I said, "Sir, just let me call the ambulance, okay? You don't gotta go anywhere, they'll come here, they'll help you, just stay with us." But he shook his head once, like a slow, defeated gesture, and said, "It's spreading, shouldn't have," before pulling his pant leg back down, covering the wound even though blood and pus seeped through the fabric instantly. And before any of us could react, he turned, limped away from the pharmacy, and headed toward the front exit with alarming speed considering his condition, and I hurried after him, calling, Sir, please, just stop for a second." But he didn't look back, didn't break pace, just pushed through the sliding doors and vanished into the dimly lit parking lot where the lights flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. And by the time the EMTs arrived, lights flashing, radios crackling, the man was gone. No trace of him except that lingering smell hanging in the cold night air like a curse, and security checked every camera, every corner of the store, and it was all there. The wound, the flies, the limp, the way he moved like something inside him was pulling him forward against his will. And the EMTs canvassed the area, checked nearby shelters, hospitals, even the creek bed behind the store, but no one saw him again. And over the next few weeks, I always thought taking the overnight shift at Riverbend Supercenter, the knockoff big box store sitting on the edge of Brookfall, was just a temporary decision, something to hold me over while I figured out what to do with my life. But the truth is, nothing in my 28 years really worked out the way I expected, and that's the real reason I ended up in that cavernous, overlit building at 2 in the morning, zoning boxes of cereal and canned beans while pushing away the creeping thought that this job was becoming permanent. The day I applied, I had just lost my job at a small logistics company after they downsized half their staff without warning. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, if you could call that dim little shoebox a real home, staring at the layoff email on my cracked phone screen, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest that always came when life reminded me that I wasn't doing as well as everyone else my age. Bills stacked up, past due notices piled on my kitchen counter, and I swear the electric company must have had my number on the speed dial. When Riverbend called me for a night shift position, I took it immediately, even though the hours were brutal and the pay was barely enough to cover rent. My life had never been glamorous, but at least the night shift gave me a strange sense of peace, a feeling like I existed in my own tiny pocket of the world, separate from everyone else. Nights at Riverbend were always the same. A handful of late-night shoppers who walked like zombies, the low hum of the industrial HVAC system, and the never-ending squeak of my inventory cart's uneven wheel echoing through the aisles. But the night everything changed started off even quieter than usual. Quiet in a way that made my skin feel tight, like the air was too still, too cold, too intentional. I clocked in at 11:07 p.m., nodding at the only other people scheduled that night. Rena, the soft-spoken cashier from Oklahoma, who'd just moved to town for her boyfriend. Dale, the 50-year-old night manager who'd been at Riverbend longer than the flooring, and Jonah, the new stalker who kept to himself and spoke with that rough Tennessee twang that made even his "hey man" sound tired. When Dale tossed me the handheld scanner and told me I'd be working the dry food section, I tried not to sigh too loudly. I'd spent the last 3 shifts in that same maze of cereal boxes and pasta bags, and every part of that aisle felt depressingly familiar. I walked down aisle 18, dragging my cart along, the wheels echoing off the endless shelves, and for a moment I caught myself thinking the store didn't look right. Not messy, not broken, just different. Like the shadows were pulled a little tighter into the corners, like the air was heavier near the back wall. I tried to brush it off. Night shifts do weird things to your brain, everyone knows that. But the unease stuck with me, settling just beneath my ribs. "Yo, you good down there?" Jonah called from a few aisles over. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, man, just tired as hell." "Aren't we all?" he muttered before his voice faded. Sometimes the only thing you hear at night in Riverbend is your own breathing. But that night, just as I bent down to stock more tomato sauce onto the shelf, I heard something else. A faint, deliberate rustling. Deliberate rustling. Not the kind from the air vents. Not the kind from a stray customer. This one sounded like someone dragging their fingertips along the cardboard boxes behind me. I whipped around, heart leaping. But the aisle was empty, except for the dull white glow of the overhead lights. "Get it together," I whispered to myself. "It's just the building settling or whatever." Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me like cold mist. I tried to stay focused, but the rustling came again, this time from the far end of the aisle. Slow, soft, wrong. I stood up fully, letting the can in my hand drop with a metallic clatter, and I stared down the length of aisle 18. At first, I thought the shape I saw was just a trick of bad lighting, but no, someone was standing there. A man, maybe, though his posture was strange, slanted slightly forward like his spine was shaped wrong. He was tall, wearing a bulky jacket with one sleeve torn clean off, exposing a pale, thin arm that hung too low. His hair was matted, his jeans stained and shredded at the knees, and his shoes didn't match. One boot, one worn-out sneaker with the sole half detached. The worst part, though, wasn't his clothes. It wasn't his posture. It was the way he was staring, straight down the aisle at me, unmoving, like he'd been carved from shadows. "Hey, sir, we're closing soon," I called out instinctively, even though we didn't close for another hour and a half. He didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't even twitch. "Sir?" I tried again, this time softer, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. The man finally moved, but not in a way that made sense. Instead of walking forward or backward, he turned slightly to the side and dragged himself toward the pharmacy section. Dragged was the right word. His right leg twisted in a grotesquely wrong direction, and every step made a faint scraping sound against the tile. I swallowed hard and reached for my handheld radio. Dale? You on channel 1? A moment of static crackled through, before his groggy voice replied, "Yeah, what's up?" "There's a guy down near 18. Looks hurt or something." "Hurt how?" Dale asked, voice alert now. "Like, bad?" "I don't know. He's limping pretty bad and not talking. He's headed toward pharmacy." "Copy. I'm coming down." I followed the man slowly, keeping a safe distance. The smell reached me before I got close enough to see him clearly. A heavy chemical stench mixed with something rotten, sharp enough to claw the back of my throat. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. "Jesus," I whispered. As he passed under a better light, I saw the thing that made my stomach lurch. A wound on his leg, torn open and oozing sticky dark fluid. The flesh around it was grayish yellow, jagged and sunken in like it had been eating itself alive. No normal injury looked like that. It was the kind that made your brain go, "Something is very seriously wrong." He didn't react to the blood dripping down his ankle, didn't react to the flies crawling along the torn edge of skin, didn't even react when I said, "Sir, you need medical help. Please stop." He muttered something under his breath. Quiet, raspy, almost like a warning. "Don't." "What?" I asked, stepping back. "Don't. Call." His voice cracked like his throat had been scraped raw. "Sir, you're bleeding badly. I'm gonna call." "No ambulance," he hissed loudly now, turning his head just enough that I saw his eyes. They were sunken deep into his skull, rimmed red and unfocused, like he was fighting to stay conscious, or like he hadn't slept in days, or like something inside him was trying to crawl out. "We gotta help you," I said, voice shaking. "You're in danger like this." "Not me," he muttered. "You." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer. He stumbled past the pharmacy counter, brushing so close to a display of first aid supplies that several boxes tumbled off and hit the floor. That was when Dale appeared, radio in hand, face pale as he caught sight of the man. "Holy hell," Dale whispered. "Sir?" The man didn't slow down. Instead, he limped toward the emergency exit at the far end of the store. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his wound glistened sickly, and I could swear, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, that the shadows clinging to his body moved slightly, like his shape was being pulled apart at the edges. "We need to stop him," I said, but my feet wouldn't move. Dale grabbed my arm. "Stay back. He needs help." I said stay back. Dale wasn't yelling out of anger. He was afraid, terrified, and that scared me more than the wounded man did. Before either of us could say another word, the man reached the emergency exit and pushed it open. The alarm screamed through the store, but he didn't flinch. He stepped into the freezing night air, that horrible dragging sound echoing with him. By the time Dale shut off the alarm and we ran outside, the man was gone. No footprints in the thin frost coating the ground. No blood trail. Nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air. "Where the hell did he go?" I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold. "Search the cameras," Dale ordered. "Now!" Back inside, I felt the wrongness settle deeper into my bones. The store felt darker than before, heavier, like his presence lingered in the air. We gathered in the security room, and Dale scrubbed through the footage. There it was, the man limping into the pharmacy area, the wound tearing open more with every step, the strange dark smear he left on the floor, except when the camera switched angles, the smear disappeared, like it had never existed. As we played the footage from the emergency exit, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. On the camera, the man pushed the door open, but after that, the footage glitched. Just a second, a flicker of static. Then the parking lot appeared empty. "That's impossible," I said. "He couldn't have moved that fast." "Maybe the cameras glitched," Rena said from behind us, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "They've done that before." "Not like that," Dale muttered, "not on all three angles." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means..." Dale started, then shook his head. "I don't know what it means. We called the cops anyway, told them a customer with a severe wound had run from the store. They swept the parking lot, the surrounding woods, even the service road behind the dumpsters. Came up empty. No one resembling the man was found that night. No hospital reported anyone matching his description. No missing persons call ever came through. The next few weeks were brutal. For everyone else, the night meant cold air, quiet aisles, and slow hours. But for me, it meant waiting. Waiting for the smell to return. Waiting for the rustling. Waiting for the dragging footstep that haunted my sleep. And it did return. Twice. Once while I was restocking paper towels, I caught the faint whiff of that same chemical decay, so sharp I nearly threw up. When I turned around, nothing was there. But a product display halfway down the aisle was swaying slightly, like someone had brushed past it. The second time was worse. I was in aisle 6 restocking laundry detergent when I heard a voice behind me. Quiet, broken, the same rasp as before. "Don't." I spun so fast I slipped on the tile. But again, no one. The only thing out of place was a single footprint on the floor, one boot tread smeared slightly. I wiped it up before anyone else saw. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to think about it. I started showing up late to work, sitting in my car in the parking lot with my stomach twisted in knots because the thought of stepping inside Riverbend made my skin crawl. The shadows felt wrong. The aisles felt too quiet. Some nights even the air tasted metallic, like blood. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes when I walked past the pharmacy, I felt a cold brush against my arm, like someone passing too close. The worst moment came 3 months later. I was zoning cereal at 2 in the morning, trying to drown out my rising panic by humming a stupid song under my breath. Out of nowhere, the scanner in my hand lost signal and beeped loudly. The aisle lights flickered. The air shifted, got heavier, colder. Then I heard it. The dragging step. One uneven scrape, then another, and then another. Slow, intentional, coming from directly behind me. "No," I whispered, frozen. "No, no, no." My breath shook as I turned. At first I thought the aisle was empty, but then I saw the shape at the far end. The same man, same jacket, same torn leg. But this time, his wound was worse, flesh blackened and peeling, as if it had been rotting for months. Yet he wasn't bleeding. Not anymore. His head lifted, and even from that distance, I could feel his deadened eyes lock onto mine. "You shouldn't have called," he rasped, voice trembling through the aisle like a cold wind. I didn't," I whispered. "You did," he breathed. And when he took one dragging step toward me, the lights above us buzzed so violently they nearly burst. "What do you want from me?" I yelled, panic making my voice crack. "Not you." His gaze drifted past me. "Them." Before I could turn, a loud bang echoed from the back of the store, a stockroom door slamming open. Jonah's scream cut through the air, raw and terrified. I ran toward the sound, heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would break. When I reached the stockroom, the smell hit me like a punch. That same choking rot. Jonah was on the ground, scrambling backward, eyes wild. He was here," he shouted. "He was right here, standing over me." "Who?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. "The guy, the messed up guy from last time." But when I shined my flashlight across the stockroom, there was no one, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. I started noticing the small things first, the stuff nobody else ever pays attention to when they're clocking in for another dead-end night shift. And maybe that's why everything that happened later got under my skin so deeply, because the night it all went down, I'd already been worn down by months of quiet dread and the kind of loneliness that only fluorescent lights and empty aisles can create. But anyway, I should start from the beginning, because none of this will make sense without the truth, without why I was even working there in the first place. So here it is. I had moved to Brindle, a small nowhere town off Highway 43 in northern Illinois, after my dad passed away and left me a little rusted Chevy, unpaid bills, and a loneliness I didn't know how to face. And the only place hiring at the time was the Brindle Supercenter, a Walmart-style megastore that sat on the edge of town like a massive blue and gray behemoth visible from miles away. And I remember thinking during my interview that the store felt too quiet for how big it was. Like something about the space didn't make sense. Like the sound got swallowed before it reached the walls. But I chalked it up to anxiety and grief and told myself, man, just get the job so you can keep gas in that Chevy. And so I did. And for the next year, I worked nights because they paid 50 cents more and I needed every damn penny. I learned the rhythm of the place, the hum of the HVAC system that sounded like a giant sleeping above the ceiling tiles, the clicking buzz of lights that never stayed steady, the way customers changed after midnight from tired to strange, whispering to themselves, staring at shelves like they forgot why they came, and the way my co-workers always disappeared for longer breaks than they were allowed, claiming the back storage area messed with their heads, which I thought was just them trying to get out of work until the night everything changed. On that February night, the cold cut through town like a knife, the kind that slices you before you feel it, and the wind had this high-pitched whistle to it, as if the air was screaming between buildings. And I parked my Chevy at 10:52 p.m., like always, tugging my jacket tight while muttering, "Damn, it's colder than a witch's kneecap tonight." The kind of thing old guys at the gas station say. And inside the store, the warmth didn't feel warm. It felt artificial, thin, like the heaters were trying, but the building itself was colder than the air. And as I clocked in, my supervisor, Lou, a 40-something guy with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that always looked tired, like he'd lived 3 lifetimes by accident, said, "Hey bud, you're on aisle 20 tonight. Cleaning goods, floor stuff, bleach, all that jazz," and slapped the schedule sheet on the podium. I nodded and said, "Aisle 20, got it." Even though I hated that aisle, not because of the chemicals or the weird customers, but because something about that section always felt colder, darker, like the lights didn't quite reach the ends. But I kept my mouth shut because bills were bills, and Lou walked off muttering about corporate breathing down his neck again. I grabbed my pallet jack, rolled a stack of boxes down the main drag, and noticed right away the emptiness of the store, more empty than normal for a Tuesday night, like the air felt hollow, echoey, and the few customers wandering around were moving slow, dragging their feet like they didn't want to be seen. When I reached aisle 20, the first thing that hit me wasn't the temperature, but the smell, a faint chemical tang mixed with something sour and rotten, something that made my nose wrinkle instantly. I muttered, "Aw, hell no, please don't tell me something spilled," and crouched down to sniff the floor, thinking maybe a bleach bottle had cracked. But it wasn't bleach. It smelled more like rotting meat mixed with acetone, like something dead soaked in chemicals, and before I could investigate further, I heard a soft dragging sound behind me, slow and uneven, like someone pulling their foot across tile. I stood up fast and spun around, expecting to see a customer, but no one was there, just the long stretch of aisle behind me dimly lit, shadows clinging to the far end. "Hello?" I said, feeling stupid immediately, because why would I talk like I was in a horror movie? But the store was so quiet my voice sounded too loud, bouncing off shelves, and then I heard it again, a dragging step, softer now, coming from the left side near the end cap. I peeked around the corner but saw nothing, so I forced a laugh to calm myself. Probably some old dude with bad shoes, I told myself, but my hand trembled slightly as I opened the first box. Halfway through stocking, I noticed the smell getting stronger, thick enough to make my stomach twist, and that's when I heard someone whisper, "Hey, hey man." So soft I wasn't even sure I heard it. I looked down the aisle again, and this time I saw him. A tall man, maybe 6'4", wearing a shredded brown jacket that looked older than me, jeans soaked at the bottom like he'd walked through slush, and one of his shoes missing entirely, replaced by a filthy bandage wrapped around his foot so thick it looked like a small animal was clinging to him. His skin was pale with a grayish tint, his hair matted flat against his head, and his posture slumped forward like his spine couldn't hold him up straight. But the worst part, the part that hit me hardest, was how his eyes looked, unfocused, watery, almost trembling like he was struggling to see. I swallowed hard and said, "Sir, you okay? You need help or something?" And he didn't answer for a good 10 seconds, just stared at me like he was trying to remember how human communication worked. And he finally muttered, voice cracked and weak, I need pharmacy?" And I nodded fast because honestly, I wanted him to go anywhere except my aisle. "Yeah, just head down this way, take a right. Can't miss it," I said, gesturing with my whole arm like a traffic cop. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, like each movement cost him something, and then he started limping down the aisle, dragging that wrapped foot with a wet scraping sound that made my stomach knot. As he passed me, the smell got unbearably thick, like hot garbage and ammonia mixed together, and for a second the scent felt so strong it blocked out all other air, and I gagged and covered my nose with my sleeve. I said quietly, "Jesus, man," and he didn't react. He kept limping, slow, painful, and I watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. I stood there frozen for maybe 5 seconds before my instincts kicked in and I followed him. Not too close, staying about 20 feet back because something about the way he moved didn't sit right, like he wasn't just injured. He looked sick in a way I'd never seen. When I got to the pharmacy section, I saw him leaning on the counter, right in front of Kelly, our night pharmacist, a short woman with quick eyes and an attitude sharp enough to cut glass if anyone tried to argue with her coupons. She was standing stiff, her face pale as he slowly lifted his pant leg, exposing a wound that made my blood run cold even from where I stood. His calf was swollen and discolored, the skin stretched tight and shiny like it might burst, and there was a deep gash running along the side that looked black around the edges. Not just bruised, necrotic dead. And inside the wound, something pale and wet glistened, like tissue or cartilage, and flies crawled lazily over the exposed flesh as if they'd been nesting there for days. Kelly gasped and stumbled back, hitting the shelves behind her, and said, Sir, you need a hospital. You can't. This isn't Jesus Christ. You can't be walking around like this." Her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard, and the man shook his head slowly and whispered, "No hospital. Not again." And something about the way he said it, tired, terrified, resigned, made my stomach twist deeper. I stepped forward and said, "Dude, seriously, I can call 911 right now. They'll come get you. And pulled my phone from my pocket. But his head snapped toward me with surprising speed, and his eyes locked onto mine, wide and fearful, like a cornered animal. "Don't," he rasped, barely audible. "Please, don't." His voice shook with something like desperation, and for a moment I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Kelly whispered harshly, "Call anyway. Call, call, call." But before either of us could move, the man pulled his pant leg down, turned around slowly, and limped away from the counter. Kelly called out, Sir, come back. This is serious. You could lose that leg. You could." But he didn't turn back. He moved with that same slow, dragging limp, the sound of his wrapped foot scraping tile echoing down the empty aisles. I started after him, dialing 911 anyway, because I wasn't about to let someone die in our store on my watch. But when I rounded the corner, he was gone. Not just further away, gone. The aisle was empty from end to end. The smell was there though, stronger, lingering like invisible smoke. I ran down the aisle, looked left, right, even checked the freezer section. But he was nowhere, and no doors had opened, no alarms triggered. "You gotta be kidding me," I muttered, heart pounding. By the time the EMTs and cops arrived 10 minutes later, I was sweating despite the cold air. And when they checked security footage, the weirdest part wasn't the man himself. It was how the cameras kept glitching the moment he walked by. Frames skipping, static crawling across the screen like his presence itself disrupted the feed. And one of the EMTs, a guy named Roger I'd seen before, said under his breath, "Man, what the hell happened to him? Looks like trench rot from World War II or some shit." And the officer next to him nodded grimly. They searched the store, the parking lot, the loading docks, even the frozen creek behind the building. Nothing. He had vanished. No tracks in the snow, no scent trail for their K9, no trace. And over the next few nights, things only got stranger. Around 1 a.m., I'd hear footsteps in aisles I knew were empty. Once I heard someone whisper my name, my actual name, not the one on my badge. But when I whipped around, no one was there. Sometimes while stocking shelves, I'd smell that faint stench of rot, just for a second. Just enough to make me gag before it disappeared again, like it was never there. A few customers complained about a tall guy limping around, but by the time security checked, nobody fitting that description could be found. It got to the point where I stopped wearing headphones entirely because every noise made me jump. One night, while breaking down boxes in the back room, the overhead lights flickered, dimming so low I could barely see, and I heard that dragging footstep again, impossibly close behind me. And when I spun around, cutter in hand, heart pounding out of my chest, no one was there, but the smell was strong, lingering, watching. I told myself I was imagining things. That trauma does weird shit to your brain, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just trauma. Something had followed me. Something still walking the aisles. Something still dragging that wounded foot. People started talking about seeing shadows move at the ends of aisles, about hearing someone breathing behind them when no one was around. Lou joked that the supercenter was haunted, but the way his voice trembled made it clear he didn't think it was funny. And then last week, while closing up, I saw him again. Not up close, too far for that, but down aisle 14, standing still, facing the shelves, head down like he was praying. I blinked, and he was gone. Just like that. A trick of the light, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know anymore. All I know is that every night since that February shift, I feel watched. The store feels alive. The shadows feel heavier. And sometimes, when I'm restocking alone around 3 a.m., I swear I hear his limp. Slow, dragging, uneven, echoing softly across tile floors. He was real. I know he was real. But the store swallowed him whole, and the world forgot him like he never existed. I didn't. I never will.